The Western Conference has been represented by the Pacific Division in each of the last two Stanley Cup Finals. Is it going to be someone other than the Oilers this time?
This is the Locked On Podcast Network's 2025 NHL Season Preview. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special crossover edition for Locked On NHL Season Previews. I am Nick Zararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That is Jess Belmosto, the host of Locked On Flames. That is Eddie Garcia, the host of Locked On Kings. And that is Chris Gawlik, the host of Locked On Golden Knights. And we want to thank everyone that is making this crossover episode their first listen of the day. This show is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you got your teams covered every single day. My friends, we have so much to get to. This is going to be a lot of fun. So I start with the very first question that our very handy dandy network producer asked us. Give me the biggest reason for optimism. We'll go clockwise from my perspective here. So we'll start with Jess. Biggest reason for optimism for your team entering the 2025-2026 season, which is less than a week away.
I think the easy answer is Dustin Wolf. He had an incredible rookie season, and I fully believe that he can continue to build off of that momentum.
Eddie?
I would say the Kings are a little bit wiser, a little bit more experienced, and a little bit deeper this year in areas that they weren't a year ago, and they hope that that can be the little bit of a difference that can get them out of the first round of the playoffs this year.
Chris?
Jeremy Lauzon and Colton Sissons figure to make incredible impacts for the Golden Knights to ease the pressure from Mitch Marner.
Connor McDavid is still an Oiler for at least 9 more months. That at the very least, you got 9 more months of Connor McDavid. As much as there's going to be conjecture, especially if this carries over into the season, which at this point it does seem like there will be. It remains to be seen how a team that needs to convince Connor McDavid it would like to win the Stanley Cup in the present and going forward, they could trade him in season. Those two ideas are wholly incongruous with each other. Trying to maintain a contender and prove to a player you're good enough to win, not only now, but going forward, would be really counterintuitive to go on and trade that guy. So with the cause for optimism, that naturally begs the other question, the alternative version of that. If you were sitting here and you woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, it's 3:30 in the morning, you're fumbling around in the dark for a sip of water, what's keeping you up at night about your team going into this season?
Everything. They stress me out beyond belief. The fact that Craig Conroy wasn't able to trade Rasmus Anderson in the offseason and extending a 37-year-old Michael Backlund for another 2 seasons, just that's enough to get me really, the cold sweats will start coming.
Eddie?
Well, certainly injuries are always a major concern. The Kings have no depth. There really isn't anything that they're potentially waiting in the wings that could come in and fill a key spot. I think you worry that they're older and slower now than they were a year ago. The optimist says they're more experienced and they're more physical, which maybe is conducive to playoff hockey. And then, is Darcy Kemper going to be a Vezina Trophy finalist again? I thought he'd be good. Certainly did not think he would be that good. And is there any carryover from the playoffs where head coach Jim Hiller didn't endear himself to many people at all, probably including a lot of his players with some of the decisions he made? So hopefully they can kind of overcome that. The coach and the players can regain their trust, and everything will be fine, but we'll see.
Will Mitch Marner show up in games 5 through 7 should the Golden Knights qualify for the playoffs? Will Adin Hill be able to replicate a 50-plus appearance season? Can we take Rasmus Anderson off of Jessica's and the Calgary Flames' hands? We are very willing to do that. And if or when and if the Golden Knights do make a play for Carter Hart, will that throw everything into a tizzy and distractions and just cause a lot of disruptions in the VGK locker room, media, fans, so on and so forth?
This is the weakest Oiler team in 3 years. If you go and look on Daily Faceoff right now, your guess is as good as mine as who's going to play with McDavid and Draisaitl. If you've been watching preseason hockey, first of all, I commend you. That's really only for sickos like us. But they've been playing Trent Frederick with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and Jess very familiar with Trent Frederick's game, his long tenure in Boston. Not a top 6 forward, not somebody who has ever really spent an extensive period of time playing with high skill guys. But Chris Knobloch looks at it as, I need to have one line I can depend on. And because of all of the uncertainty from guys like Ike Howard and Matthew Savoie and Andrew Mangiapane, Zach Hyman's probably going to miss at least October, if not a little bit into November. With so much uncertainty throughout the lineup, Chris Knobloch has looked at it and said, if I have at least one line I can depend on, I will figure out the rest as we go. He thinks the Oilers defense is going to be a step up from what it was last year. A full year of Jake Wallman, even though he's been dinged up in the preseason, he will make a difference. And this brings us to the middle ground, something that we have sometimes a bad habit of doing as hockey fans, going either full optimist or full doomerist. And we'll go around the horn real quick. These over-under numbers are presented by our friends over at FanDuel, who are projecting our team's totals for this upcoming season. I'll be candid. I was very surprised to see the Oilers checking in at 106.5, tied for the highest over-under in this division with the Golden Knights. Candidly, I would tell you, I think the Oilers go under this number. They've only gone over this number once with Connor McDavid on the team. So just based on recent history and the fact that this roster on paper has so much uncertainty, I feel like under 106.5 is a really good play. What about you, Chris?
As far as the Golden Knights are concerned, 110 points last season. Pacific wasn't necessarily too much in doubt. 106 just feels a little bit strong, knowing what happens with injuries and everything. I wouldn't be surprised if the Golden Knights came in closer to that 104, 103 range, which is probably, based on what you said about your Oilers, probably about the same ballpark as to where both teams will find up. I will go slightly under on FanDuel's 106.5 points.
Eddie?
I think the Kings are definitely not going to replicate what they did a year ago when they had 105 points and 48 wins, which, oh, by the way, tied their franchise record in both categories. So I think what they've done this offseason at best is a sideways move. I don't see them being better. And I think, frankly, some of the Ducks, maybe even the Sharks, some of the teams in the Pacific have gotten a little bit better. They're not going to be complete pushovers this year, although if we get to it, which I guess we will, we can talk about if who's going to make the playoffs. But I think it's right about the right number. I think 98.5 is about the right number, but I would probably shade a little under.
Jess?
82.5 kind of feels a little generous. This team cannot score goals, and their defense resembles traffic cones. So I'm gonna go with the under, especially with an impending Rasmus Anderson trade.
That was going to be the question I had for you before we wrapped up our first segment. Have you just chalked that up as like that's a loss that's happening for sure before the season's over?
Yeah, honestly, since the end of he did his like exit interview, he was very like whatever about it, and like I don't want to say unprofessional, but just not like what we're used to seeing from hockey players. He was just kind of over it and like, okay, cool. And Backlund even said, yeah, that's imminent. That's happening. It's obvious.
Has Huberdeau gone to practice since the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, he was actually there today.
Good.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah. That will do it for our opening segment. But when we come back, we're going to break down those off-season editions. Yes, there will be Cody Ceci discourse. There will be Brian Dumoulin discourse, some Andrew Mangiapane discourse, and a whole lot more. So be sure to stick around to this crossover edition of Locked On Pacific Division. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. That's where our friends at Monarch Money come in as an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or phone. Monarch Money is built for people with busy lives. If you've put off organizing your finances or the thought makes you anxious, that's what Monarch is for. Monarch does all of the heavy lifting. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visualizations, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money. And Monarch promises you will never, ever touch a spreadsheet. Monarch made me aware that I was not saving enough money for the plans I was making. It's nice to say I want to go on vacation or go to a concert. Paying for it, on the other hand, is something you actually have to do. Monarch gives me targeted goals to set money aside to hit my plans. So that way I'm not financing trips. Do not let financial opportunities slip through the cracks. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year subscription. One more time, that's 50% off your first year at monarchmoney.com with code LOCKEDONNHL. Thank you so much to everybody who is hanging out on this crossover edition of the Locked On Pacific Division. And I will get the ball rolling because the Oilers had a lot of turnover. So we'll start out. They had Trent Frederick on the team last year, but he was playing effectively on one leg. So I'm chalking that up as a new piece. Ike Howard, they traded their first round pick from last year for when the Hobie Baker in college. David Tomasek, a European free agent. Matthew Savoie, they acquired last summer, only played a handful of games at the NHL level last year, but is expected to make the team. And then I mentioned him before, one of my favorite players in the league, Andrew Mangiapane. Play on the left, play on the right, somebody who I expect to, when all is said and done, to end up playing alongside one of McDavid or Draisaitl for a good chunk of the season. But all of these moves have one common theme. These are either inefficient or entirely unknown products. You have no earthly idea what you are going to get out of any of these guys. But when you are up against the cap ceiling the way the Oilers are, if you'll recall, they had to give away Evander Kane. They gave away Victor Arvidsson just to fill out the roster, to have enough money to give Evan Bouchard an extension and to sign Andrew Mangiapane. Of course, very famously did not change either of the goalies. They are running it back with Calvin Pickard and Stuart Skinner yet again. The Oilers, for the second straight offseason, a lot of turnover, but not a lot of certainty. The Oilers have introduced a lot of volatility to their team.
Yeah, no, I think the Flames are essentially running it back with the same team. I'm hoping that they will allow some young guys to come in. I think that Zane Parak is like a shoe-in at this point. They don't have a lot of, they had plenty of cap space, but they weren't willing to trade anyone or do anything bold or daring. The goaltending situation has changed with Dan Vladar signing in Philly. So they have Devin Cooley, who played with the Wranglers last year, and they signed Ivan Prosvetov, who was with the Avalanche and then played over in Russia. So it's really essentially the same team.
Yeah. Eddie?
Well, the Kings have definitely made some additions. They reportedly wanted to go big game hunting. They had a meeting with Mitch Marner set, and then he told them, don't bother coming out. I've decided where I want to go. And obviously it wasn't Los Angeles. So it wasn't as if the Kings weren't interested in going after a big player like Marner, but it wasn't obviously where he wanted to go. And that's a pretty big difference as far as where he decided to go. So they went out and upgraded, they hope, some areas around the edges, so to speak. They bring in Corey Perry from the Oilers. So a lot of people, of course, are joking the Kings will lose in the final. He's now hurt, but we'll be back at the latest mid-November. And they got him for the playoffs, not the regular season. So he should be fine. A knee injury there. They bring in Joel Armia from the Montreal Canadiens. Perry and Armia will be on the fourth line. That will be an upgrade, although it's a fourth line upgrade. They bring in a couple of reliable veterans, I guess, in Brian Dumoulin, who I thought was very good with the Devils in the playoffs last year, had spent a lot of time before that with the Ducks, won a cup in Pittsburgh. I think he's serviceable. Cody Ceci, of course, gets a ton of grief. I hate the contract they gave him. I don't understand it. He's totally overpaid, but it appears he's going to be on the third pairing. So Cody Ceci on the third pairing, fine. I think it's okay. And then they brought in a slight upgrade at backup goalie and Anton Forsberg from Ottawa. So small improvements around the edges, as I said, probably overpaid for a few of those guys. They lose Vladislav Gavrikov to the New York Rangers, and he was terrific for them a year ago. But I think because the Kings are so well structured as a team defensively, and they will have a full season, we assume this time around, of Drew Doughty, I think they'll be okay absorbing the loss of Gavrikov.
Completely unrelated to Eddie's statement. So the Golden Knights got Mitch Marner. How about that? Mitch Marner, we will see how that works out. I don't know if we're going to see necessarily 100-point Mitch Marner. He doesn't have Austin Matthews in the center to feed the puck to and to score 60 goals on his behalf. I'm not saying Eichel can't score a lot of goals, but two very different players. Marner, obviously elite talents. Golden Knights were big game hunting, and as always, the Golden Knights seem to find a way to land these players. So there's some complementary pieces. One, they have to replace Alex Pietrangelo and his injury, unfortunately, and it's kind of a strange situation. He's not declaring that he's retired, just that he's not playing anytime soon, and there might be surgery, and it's basically just a way for the Golden Knights to keep him on the salary or keep him on the roster, but he isn't counting against the salary cap. Insert any comment you'd like right there, everybody. Lastly, Colton Sissons, Jeremy Lauzon, a couple complimentary pieces. Sissons will take Nicholas Waz's spot on the fourth line. A little more of a defensive, stay-at-home type of face-off specialist, good killer. And then Lauzon, some injuries right now, projects to be on the third pairing / 7th D, which will be kind of sharing that spot with NHL journeyman Ben Hutton.
And then the other half of our transaction segment, the breakout candidate for your team, somebody who might not necessarily have the biggest profiles, but has the capacity to maybe exceed expectations and help their team out. For the Oilers, it's whichever one of Matthew Savoie or Ike Howard gets to play more with Draisaitl or McDavid. That is kind of your lottery ticket in this league. If you get to ride coattails with a star, Savoie has played a little bit with Draisaitl in the preseason and last year during his cup of coffee. My assumption is Savoie has an easier path to regular NHL playing time because he can kill penalties, because he can play both wings. I think Savoie is more likely to be the breakout candidate, and nothing crazy. Probably 40-ish points would be the best possible outcome for him this year. But that's something the Oilers didn't have. If you go and look at their team production last year, once you got past McDavid, Draisaitl, Evan Bouchard, Corey Perry had the third most goals on the Oilers in the regular season last year. Not something anybody was really banking on. So Savoie is somebody I think the Oilers can expect nice things from.
I would honestly say Rory Currens. He has flown under the radar and has been a fringe NHLer. Finally made his debut last season, had 4 points in 5 games, and has just had a phenomenal camp. He's second in points behind Morgan Frost, which is also unexpected. So for a team that needs to get better down the middle, and a guy that really is hungry and wants it more than I would say a lot of the other guys fighting for his spot, and just the fact that he's still hanging around in camp is huge. So I would like to see him be that guy.
Eddie?
I think the Kings, two pretty clear names, Quentin Byfield, Andrei Kopitar has announced before the season this will be his last go-around. So Byfield is expected to take a step forward and move in probably to the number 1 center spot next year. He was kind of drafted as the heir apparent in that regard. So, made the switch to center from wing last year, which is a position that he grew up playing. Did a pretty nice job transitioning there. I think, though, they expect a little bit of a bump in production this year, maybe approaching 30 goals and around 60 points. We'll see. On the back end, Brant Clark is a guy who they had asked to be a more defensive-minded player a year ago to kind of prove to them he can play in this kind of defense-first system for the Kings. And if he was able to prove that, they would be more willing to let the training wheels off him a little bit more this year, let him be a little bit more aggressive with the offensive tools that he has, playing on a sea of defensive defensemen for the most part. So Ken Holland, the new GM, has said that those two guys are very important pieces this year. They expect both of them to take a step forward, and they hope that that will be part of the reason why the Kings end up in a better spot than they were a year ago.
Kopitar is my favorite player in the world, by the way, and it's tough to imagine a Kings team without him. That's his retirement sucks, I understand, but I've enjoyed watching him. As long as I've been watching hockey for. But on the Golden Knights side, Ivan Barbashev. It's hard to talk about a 29-year-old as a breakout candidate, but he's likely a slide in on that left wing with Jack Eichel and Mitch Marner. Someone's going to have to shoot the puck out of those 3 individuals, and Barbashev should have a ton of open ice. Ivan Barbashev has had one season, two times he's been over 20 goals, 26 and 23 goals, with Eichel and Marner on the same line, he should score 40 goals. And I say that half jokingly, half seriously, because if you don't score that many goals with those two, what are you even doing out there, I guess, number one. And then under the radar, if Carl Lindbaum, so he's projected to be the third goaltender on the Golden Knights roster, your starter, obviously, in the American League. Very good, 265 goals against, but a 912 save percentage on a very bad American League Henderson Silver Knights team. I think he will push Akira Schmid possibly for that backup role. If Aiden Hill gets injured, there's a certain path to Lindbaum getting a lot of time, and he's a name you might know a lot by come January, February.
So we've laid out the players. Coming up next, we're going to break down the stakes for what's on the line this upcoming season for these 4 playoff hopefuls. Guarantees right after this. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out with us here on this crossover edition of the Locked On Pacific Division. Friends, when push comes to shove, somebody has to get the blame if things don't go well. The first question I have for you guys, and I'll kick us off, what is at stake if things don't go to plan this year? Who's on the hot seat? Is it your coach? Is it your GM? Is it your star player? For the Oilers, it's threefold, because if this year does not go to plan, if they miss the playoffs, McDavid leaves. Unequivocally, McDavid leaves and everybody gets fired. If they don't make at least the second round of the playoffs, I think there's a reasonable argument McDavid might go to at least free agency to see what's out there. And if McDavid leaves, this team is starting over. The entire premise of giving Stan Bowman the keys was he took over a Blackhawks team that was right there on the precipice and largely just took what was already there, and they got over the hump and did that two more times. After that, they hired his agent to be the president of the team. They hired his junior hockey coach to be the coach of the team. If McDavid goes, this entire operation was pointless, and they are starting over around Draisaitl and Bouchard. And it's a long road back from the abyss, as Oiler fans spent most of the 2010s doing. What's going on in Calgary? Is Craig Conroy going to start to actually kind of get some pressure, or do we know this is a long-term project here?
I think that everyone is kind of bought into this is definitely a long-term project, but I feel like there definitely has to be some pressure applied, because I don't understand why he's so afraid to pull the trigger on certain trades. I think I get it. It's a business. You want to make the room happy, but at the end of the day, if you have to place Jake Bean on waivers to get one of your young players in this lineup, you do it. It does not. I don't care that he's a Nepo baby, whatever. And I don't think that they're going to fire Huska either. I think that that's just not anything that has ever crossed their mind, even if they miss the playoffs for the 4th season in a row.
Eddie?
Yeah, there's no question Jim Hiller is on the hot seat. You hate to say that for a guy in his first full season as an NHL head coach, guiding a team to a franchise record tying number of wins and points. But as you know very well, Nick, he had some very questionable decisions in the playoffs, a coach's challenge, his usage of his bench, which he decided basically let's not play any fourth line players or any third pairing defensemen for the most part. And let's see how that goes. Well, it didn't work out very well. Oh, by the way, he also wasn't hired by the current general manager, who, as Nick also knows, is not afraid to fire coaches and bring in someone else. So he's on the hot seat right off the bat. We'll see how it goes. I think the Kings need to go off to a pretty decent start. And I also think, look, Ken Holland was hired as a short-term fix. He wouldn't say how long his contract was. He just said multi-years. So maybe it's 2. But if it's more than 3, I'd be shocked. So he's not here for any long-term trying to turn this thing around. So he won't be here very long. I think team president Luc Robitaille is also on the hot seat. He's hired a couple of GMs. They've hired a couple of coaches. In the end, the Kings have not won a playoff series since they won the Cup in 2014. And so that is a problem. So I think head coach on the hot seat, and I think team president might be there as well.
For the Golden Knights, it's going to be Coach Bruce Cassidy. If things don't go well, that's where the first attention will go. You're talking a team that won the Pacific last year, Stanley Cup a couple seasons before. Could have advanced past who they get knocked out by a couple of years ago. Doesn't matter. Point being is you have Mitch Marner, you have all these big pieces. We might be taking on Rasmus Anderson either this year or next year, but likely sometime before the trade deadline, so they can lock him up for that 8th year and everything and all that stuff. So you look at this roster, the Golden Knights are a co-favorite for the Pacific, top 4, top 5 betting favorite according to FanDuel to win the Stanley Cup. If this season does not go according to plan, and the players, of course, there's a regular amount of variance as far as health and injuries go, Coach Cassidy would get the first blame, but it would also be hard not to at least address Kelly McCrimmon if things didn't go well with Mitch Marner in the playoffs. Yes, he can score points in games 1 through 4, but I think it's games 5 through 7 or 4 through 7. Any Maple Leafs fan can recite his stat line to a T because it's all we've heard about all summer long.
The last question I have for you guys, being that 3 of the 4 teams represented here made the playoffs last year, I'm going to rephrase the initial question we were asked. Of any of the teams that are not represented in this room, in this division, so the Sharks, the Ducks, Seattle, and Vancouver, which of those teams do you feel is most likely to jump into the mix? Not even saying they're a playoff team, but at least be hanging around in the conversation, maybe be in the wild card bubble. For me, I think by default, it has to be the Ducks with how aggressive they were in the offseason, going after Joel Quenneville, trading for Chris Kreider. They have a lot of young guys they've had percolating there for the last number of seasons. And Pat Verbeek kind of grew impatient with how long it was taking any of them to take some initiative to show some development. They went out and got Quenneville. They have a lot of expensive veterans, Vetrano, Kreider, Trouba, Alex Killorn, a lot of guys who have playoff experience. I don't think they're going to jump, especially with how good the Central is. I think the Central probably gets 5 teams again. But I think there's a real world where the Ducks could make some noise this year.
Yeah, I would have to agree. I think that it feels like the more obvious choice. Like you said, they have a good supporting cast for their young guys, and I think that that's really one of the biggest difference makers, because if it's all young guys, who do you have to learn from?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm jumping the gun here. I think the 3 teams that made the playoffs a year ago are going to make the playoffs again. But if I were going to pick a team, I actually think I would go with Vancouver. That, of course, is assuming that Thatcher Demko stays healthy. When he does that, he's a pretty darn good goalie. They obviously have Quinn Hughes, who's an elite defenseman. I don't believe that Elias Pettersson is going to return to the form that they hope and pray that he will. But if he does, then you've got your holy trinity of a top line forward, an elite defenseman, and a pretty good goalie. So if I were to pick one team, I think the Ducks are still a year away. I know they're really excited about having a NHL caliber head coach, which they don't feel they had for a while there. And certainly he can make a bit of a difference, but I think they're still about a year away. So I would go with Vancouver.
I just wrote down Holy Trinity. That's pretty awesome. I'm going to borrow that, I think, Eddie, just so you know.
You have my blessing.
I just wrote it down. Thank you. I'm blessed. All right, so real quick, Seattle, I don't think they have an identity. They definitely don't have a star player. Throw them out the window. San Jose, up and coming. It's not their time yet. Vancouver, I just think there's so many questions from locker room situations, player turnover, personnel turnover, et cetera, et cetera. Anaheim Ducks, I'm with you guys. I really think Anaheim has made some moves for some veterans, some star players to a degree with up-and-coming players. They got $13.5 million in cap space, so let's just get crazy for a second. Things go rough in Edmonton, and Anaheim comes knocking. Anaheim finds a way for Edmonton to retain a little bit of McDavid's salary, and Connor McDavid is an Anaheim Duck, and they wind up winning the Stanley Cup. You heard it here first on Locked On, on the Locked On Podcast Network.
It's funny you say that, and I'll wrap up on this note. When I had to entertain that for a while in July when there wasn't a lot going on, the Ducks were a team I identified as having 9 former first-round picks in the organization that
Sleepers.
If you're going to cut your losses and have to start over, the Ducks and Montreal are the 2 teams I would be targeting for that exact reason.
Montreal's going to be really good for a long time.
Montreal, I think, is really set up nicely, but I want to thank everyone that made this show their first listen of the day. Be sure to check out the other creators, whichever one of our shows you normally listen to. Throw the other channels a subscription. Check in on the other teams in your division. Get an idea on what's going on. We will all see you guys on our respective feeds real soon. Hockey's back, friends.
Cool.